Welcome to the sixth episode of the world's most famous and powerful prostitutes ever. In an empire where an emperor's every move was watched, a body sacred and a time in the state, he ran with it for another woman who would never, ever publicly say anything to him. It was the great romance in the middle of this golden age, a brief moment of extraordinary beauty and art, right before civilization itself was going to crash down. This is the tale of Emperor Huizong and Li Shishi, and the forbidden love that threatened to unravel an empire. I am Czar, an educated person teaching the common man about famous, powerful prostitutes of today's world. Please like or subscribe or comment to my content. We know that our story does not start in the perfumed halls of power, but in the dirtied, uncompromising street of Bianjing, the splendid capital of the northern Song Dynasty in the early 12th century. This was the most populous and prosperous city on earth, a thriving city with 1 million inhabitants. Bustling with canals full of sailing ships and markets with silks, spices, and valuables galore. But if only one scholar in a quiet garden debating poetry, there was also a child shivering in the back of a dark alley. And it's in one of those alleys, the book says, that a little girl of the surname Wang discovers herself utterly alone. It was said that the beginning of her story was in a humble dwelling, yet tragedy followed her from start. She was only 3 years old when she lost her mother to illness. Not long afterward, her father, a lowly worker, was falsely confined and lost her life behind frozen stone walls. Thus was born an orphan, a ghost in the great city's machinery. For a while, her only lullaby was the chanting of monks when she was sent to a nearby temple. But in the midst of rising instability, even a temple's kindness has its limits. Soon, she was out on the streets once more, a small, overlooked figure, simply hanging on to life in a world that had no place for her. Survival was a daily fight for a single morsel of food or bed. Her fate appeared intended to sink into the city's apathy. But fortune, as it happens, is a fickle, unpredictable thing. While the girl teetered on the brink of oblivion, 2 freeze-sharp eyes spotted her. They were of a woman named Li Yun, and she owns one of the most famous pleasure houses in Bianjing. But Li Yun saw more than a starving orphan. She saw a flash. Underneath all the filth, she saw a rare, arresting beauty, and a soul so strong it had not been broken. Li Yun took the girl in, assigned her a new name, Li Shishi, and put her on track toward the very foundation of the empire. Now in the Song Dynasty, being a courtesan was not only about a pretty face. Artists, poets, and musicians were the most famous women to be found in this category. As well as their features were lovely, their mind sharp. Seeing the potential in Li Shishi, Li Yun made a crucial decision. She would not hurriedly bring her into service. Instead, she invested in her. For more than a decade, Li Shishi's life was life as a lifelong learner. To be educated here, she hired the top tutors in the capital to teach everything from the finesse and power of zithers and the calculated choreography of Go, to the measured and understated cadences of classical verse and the intricate rules of high society. This was more than training. It was a total transformation. The street orphan had been painstakingly shaped into a woman of unmatched grace and intellect. By adolescence, Li Shishi was a dazzling prodigy. She had a vocal ability to enchant the most cynical scholars with no end in sight, and there had previously whispered murmurs about her ability on the stage of dancing. Even less noticed people would speak of her skill in dancing in murmuring, appreciating tone. Her mind that could write poetry and even talk about philosophy with piercingly pointed and intelligent commentary, her abilities as a philosopher were what separated her out from otherwise very much. With her celebrity growing up among the upper classes of Bianjing, scholars, officials, and poets vied for her attention, not just to see her, but to chat with her. One of her devoted admirers was the great poet Zhou Banyan, who wrote much of his most famous work for her to perform on the stage. Legend has it that Song Dynasty, the celebrated outlaw hero from the classic novel Water Margin, found her audience. Li Shishi had become a star. But nobody can have guessed that her biggest fan was a man who ruled from behind the high walls of the imperial palace. Emperor Huizong was possibly the biggest paradox of his time. In most respects, he was a terrible monarch. He was, by all accounts, a man of corrupt policy, infighting, and an army neglect that eventually ruined his whole dynasty. Yet this same man was, without question, one of the most talented artists China has ever seen. Huizong was a master painter, especially of birds and flowers, whose art is still revered today. He was a sensitive poet and a brilliant calligrapher who developed his own slender gold style. He was an ardent musician, a collector of priceless antiques, and a patron who founded the Imperial Painting Academy, bringing the finest artists of the empire to his court. But the throne for him was a gilded cage. Huizong found the real-life responsibilities of an emperor, reports on crops and military garrisons, unbearable. He became despondent and alone, perceiving the flattery from his courtiers and the rigid rites of the palace as vacuous and meaningless. He was an artist imprisoned in the body of an emperor, a man who desperately needed a true connection to someone who could relate to his passion for beauty, not just his power. It was then, through this polished misery, that a powerful minister noticed an opportunity to get on the emperor's side. He recognized the emperor's boredom and, with a carefully chosen word, referred to a lady in the city whose talent and beauty had been described as unrivaled. He spoke of Li Shishi. That piqued the emperor's curiosity, and he initiated a plan, which he had put into practice, to defy 1,000 years of imperial tradition. In 1109, Emperor Huizong made a decision that would become legend. He purportedly had ditched his dragon robes and disguised himself as a merchant and sneaked out of the palace to visit a courtesan under the cover of night. The encounter was electric. When Huizong eventually encountered Li Shishi, he saw everything promised by the stories, and yet more. He was captivated by her grace and her intelligence. He was captivated by the beauty in her soul as well. In her, he discovered an equal, not a fawning subject. Here came somebody who could see the small brushstroke in his newest painting, who could argue a poem at length, who got to see him on a level no courtier ever did. And for Li Shishi, she did not see the emperor, but a man with deep artistic abilities, whom she could respect as a man of profound art merit, and respect that she found the most admiration. That first clandestine encounter ignited an obsessive love affair. The emperor began to visit her almost constantly, and his surreptitious visits started to be the same clandestine whisperings of a secret around the capital. But the risk was huge, and that is where the story becomes purely folklore. To address the problem, Huizong supposedly commissioned the building of a secret tunnel, a secret path to Li Shishi's home from the imperial palace. This legendary tunnel was their secret tunnel, where the Son of Heaven could turn away from his tasks and come back to the woman he cared for like a man. The emperor showered gifts and affection on her, even pronouncing her Lady of Ying State, a status far beyond any courtesan's wildest dreams. Theirs was a profound emotional and intellectual connection, a secret world they created for themselves, buried directly beneath the feet of the unsuspecting empire. But this forbidden romance was a complicated affair. Li Shishi had a whole network of admirers, and her devotion to the emperor produced high-stakes drama and serious danger. The best remembered of these stories, which we discover not through historical records but through later plays and literature, is about her other great admirer, the poet Zhou Bangyan. It's the story that Zhou Bangyan was visiting Li Shishi one evening when, unbidden, a fuss at the front door announced an uncharacteristic guest, the emperor. In a blind panic, with nowhere else he could go, Zhou did what he could. He rushed underneath the bed and hid. In the dark, his heart racing, he lay there for hours. And he was forced to hear as the world's greatest man flirted with the woman he loved too. He heard the emperor give her a rare, fresh orange, a delicacy shipped all the way from the south. A fly on the wall to this secret meeting. The humiliated, jealous poet did what he did best.
he composed. He wrote himself a poem, one that would record every single detail of the scene. It was later called A Lad on the Road. Days later, maybe mistaking the poem's perilous roots, Li Shishi sang the new song for the emperor. As she sang, Huizong's face changed. He also noticed the details. The orange, the wording, a cold fury washed over him. He had realized a third person had been there.
The emperor's rage was in full force once Li Shishi admitted Zhou Bangyan was the author. Feeling betrayed, he promptly had Zhou cast out of his official position and banished from the capital. It was only as Li Shishi sobbed over the absurdity of the situation and pleaded for mercy that Huizong had to intervene, letting the poet remain.
True or false? The episode speaks to the fragility of her position, caught between a pair of brilliant men, her own life depending on the whims of a jealous, omnipotent lover. The emperor was lost in art and love, but outside palace walls and secret tunnels, the world was getting darker.
In the north, there was a formidable new power emerging, the Jurchens, a confederation of nomadic tribes from Manchuria who had united to form the Jin dynasty. Emperor Huizong had, in a moment of fatal miscalculation, regarded the Jin as an easy pawn. He allied with them to destroy a common foe. The alliance had succeeded, but the Song military was so weak in the campaign that its failures revealed the empire's internal decay to new and ambitious allies. With their old nemesis dead, the Jin were alone on the northern border of the Song, and they gazed down at the rich, decadent, and militarily weak empire with greedy eyes. The edifice of Huizong's golden age was crumbling. As Li Shishi debated poetry, Jurchen warriors sharpened the blades. Although he paid for priceless paintings, the Jin were raising war horses. The great art and culture of the Northern Song was nothing but a beautiful but delicate layer over a rotting core. The storm was approaching, and no secret tunnel could provide refuge from the currents of history. The Jin shattered the alliance and swarmed their complete army south in 1125. The invasion had begun. At the same moment the Jin armies were marching on the capital, Emperor Huizong did what he was best at. He fled. He abdicated his throne in order to abandon the responsibility for the impending disaster, and he chose to abdicate to his eldest son. It didn't work. The Jins besieged Bianjing as the defenders defended the city, launching primitive gunpowder weapons hurled from the walls called thunderclap bombs. More noise than anything else, but still shocking the invaders. It wasn't enough. The Song court was in chaos. January 1127 saw the inevitable occur. The gates breached and the city collapsed. What followed was a cataclysm that would haunt the Chinese people for 1,000 years afterwards. The Jingkong Incident. For weeks, the Jin soldiers plundered the city, ransacking palaces to boot, gutting it in the process. But their main reward included the imperial family itself. The new emperor and his retired father, Huizong, were rounded up in March 1127, along with more than 14,000 people from the imperial palace, including rulers of the royal family, princes, princesses, officials, artists, and artisans. They were forced into a brutal march north to captivity in Manchuria. Their titles and gaudy robes stripped from them, they were slaves. The emperor, who had existed on an insuperable high level of luxury for most of his life, was given in disgrace by his captors a new name, the Besotted Duke. He would spend the final 9 years of his life in captivity, dying in exile. The Northern Song Dynasty was over. In this nationwide catastrophe, Li Shishi's world was totally ruined. The city that had worshipped her was wrecked. The emperor who had adored her had become a captive. Her own fate had now a knife's edge for her. So what happened to her? History offers no single answer. Instead, it gives us 3 clashing legends, reflecting different aspects of the culture, and each a side to a whole. The first version depicts her as a patriot. Under this version, she collected all the wealth the emperor had granted her and gave away every last part to the struggling Song army to help defend the city.
Then, after giving everything to her country, she became a Taoist nun, escaping the world terror with a life of quiet spiritual contemplation. It is the second version, and the most heartbreaking, that her fame was what became her undoing. Her Jin commanders had heard of her and sent soldiers to her place. She was captured and taken before a Jurchen general who would want to seize her as a war prize, but Li Shishi refused. So, in a final act of defiant loyalty, she took a golden hairpin from her hair and swallowed it, choosing a painful death over a life of dishonor. But a third story leads to a quieter, more mysterious conclusion. In this version, she noticed the writing on the wall, and after Huizong abdicated, she was expelled from the palace and gave away her wealth, and then just vanished. She is said to have escaped the fall of the city, fleeing south. Some say she retired to a temple and lived out her days in anonymity. One account even claims a poet met her years later, an old woman living a simple life. Yet in this version, she survives not in heroism or martyrdom, but obscurity, melting back into the low class from which she hails. We'll never know 100% which of these fates was the true one. Did she die as a martyr, live out her life praying to God on earth, or go to sleep like a ghost into the fog of history? The fact that her story can end in 3 different ways speaks to her legend.
Each end served a role for its narrative, either as a symbol of patriotism, an instance of noble defiance, or quiet resilience. It is sure enough that Li Shishi's life was a brilliant, flickering flame, extinguished by the tempest of history. She advanced from the squatter's gutter to the empire's secret room as a reminder of the might of art in a culture that ranked art as its supreme value. Her love affair with Emperor Huizong in a secret tunnel she can never be more sure of serves as an ideal allegory for their whole world, an entire world of beautiful, hidden beauty that, until it's lost and burned down and melted, is somehow solid. It was a love that ran afoul of convention, but she couldn't keep up with an invading army. Now, 1,000 years after the death of Li Shishi, we have the story of forbidden love, although much a lesser version, the story of impermanence, a lesson that every moment, every act of passion and beauty in humanity, whether in this case poetry or prose, can be drowned off with the brutal winds, waves, and tides of warfare. She remains a legend, her actual end erased by time. Eternal, the secret love of the last emperor of the Northern Song. Hope you enjoyed my story, exploring some of the most hidden stories in the world. I greatly appreciate your loving us and liking, sharing, and subscribing, and your comments can always be welcomed. You will see this in a new episode, starring infamous prostitutes and powerful women. I know what it takes to understand and accept the truth in a story, she said after viewing it. Many people don't just sit there listening. They act like they are talking and understanding what they're listening to, looking at, trying to comprehend a story. Thanks for watching.